Latest episode of Better Humans at Work. I am honored to have Michael Bach with us here
Wow.
today. He is an author, a speaker, and an IDEA thought leader. So, inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. Did I get that right?
Yes, you got it right.
Excellent. Michael comes from such a rich idea background, including being Deputy Chief Diversity Officer at KPMG International. He's also founder of for the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, as well as Pride at Work Canada. Michael is the best-selling and award-winning author of two books, Birds of All Feathers, Doing Diversity and Inclusion Right, and Alphabet Soup, The Essential Guide to LGBTQ2 plus inclusion at work. And in 2023, Michael was named one of the 10 most influential DE&I leaders revamping the future by CIO Views magazine. Michael is currently writing a book about inclusive leadership, which we're going to hear all about today. So listen in as he gives us his do's and don'ts on the topic. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
It is my pleasure. Anything for you, as always.
Michael and I get to follow each other around the
We
country
do.
at various
Fun.
SHRM conferences, the Society of Human Resource Management, and we'll both be in Denver next month speaking at SHRM Inclusion. And Michael, what is your talk on?
My topic is called Chat GPT Can't Fix This. And it is on how to use AI in a way that is inclusive, because, of course, the default with AI is not necessarily that. So I'm trying to encourage people to be more thoughtful in how they approach specifically diversity and inclusion with AI.
I will be there as long as I'm not speaking at the same time because that
You're
sounds fun.
not, but what is your topic?
My topic, I'm actually speaking with Sir Treese Shipley, a former co-owner of Mattingly, and we are talking on how to not suck as an ally. So
Which is
3
such a great
rules
topic.
to not suck as an ally, and to hear those rules, you got to attend the event to find out what those rules are. But one of them is very similar to Fight Club. Like if you the first rule of Fight Club, you don't talk about Fight Club. So a little preview there for you.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, you're on at what, 9 a.m. on Thursday.
Yes,
And
yes.
I am
Ooh.
on at 3:30 or 1:30. I never in my time. No, 3:30 on Tuesday.
Yes,
I
Mountain Time.
refuse. I refuse to speak on Wednesday for what I feel should be obvious reasons, but I figure
Yes,
everyone is going to be hungover.
yes. Hungover for sure. If
Doesn't
not
matter who you
from
voted for. You're going
alcohol,
to be hungover.
then from emotional turmoil,
Yes,
however the
exactly.
results are going to be. Uh, but enough about the future. We'll get more into the future here shortly. I want to hear a little bit about the past and how you got into the idea field. Just this journey of doing this work for you and where you're at now.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a odd route to get into this field. I'm not an HR practitioner. I don't come from that world. I had been working professionally in, for the most part, IT for the first half of my career. But at the same time, I've always done what we now call diversity and inclusion work, um, sort of off the side of my desk as a volunteer in different capacities, mostly in the LGBTQIA plus space, also with women's organizations and immigrant organizations, very passionate about those areas. But it wasn't work that I was going to get paid for, or at least not paid to how would support my bougie lifestyle. Um, and then I was at KPMG in the consulting practice, in the IT consulting practice. And this opportunity came up. With a group of people, I started the employee resource group for the LGBTQIA plus population at the firm, and got me an audience with the CEO and CHRO. And I said, well, if we're serious about this diversity thing, we need full-time resources, and I want that job. And I wrote the business case for the creation of my role. I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, at the time, there were probably about 50 people in Canada that had diversity as a full-time job.
Okay.
And so there wasn't really a job description to turn to.
Yeah.
But I just sort of dove in with both feet and faked it until I made it and managed to figure things out. And then I actually wrote the business case for the creation of a role globally. And so ended up being in the global team for a couple of years. Um, and then went back into Canada, started the Canadian Center for Diversity and Inclusion. And then in November of 2022, I went out on my own just to have a slower life. I
A
wanted
slow
a
life.
slightly slower life. Yes.
And what does life look like for you now as out on your own? Is it slower? I guess that's my first question.
That's a great question. It is and it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
It when I was at the Canadian Center for Diversity and Inclusion, I had a team of 50 people who
Mm-hmm.
worked for me. So I had a marketing team, I had an IT team, I had people that could do things for me. So while I'm working as hard, I'm having to do things like deal with my own IT issues, which thankfully, considering my career history, I can handle.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a I think a more satisfying life now. I'm mostly focused on speaking and writing
Mm-hmm.
books and doing the things that I love, pushing the envelope, advancing the conversation. It's I would say it's maybe not slower, but certainly more satisfying.
That's wonderful. That's the most we can ask for. As your resident organizational psychologist, I will validate how doing meaningful work is so much more important
Here,
than
here.
being busy doing whatever is not as meaningful and enriching to us. So,
Yes.
but this book writing. So I want to hear all about the book that's on the forefront. Now, this will be your fourth book, right?
It is my fourth book.
That's
My first,
exciting.
yeah, my first one came out in 2020. It's called Birds of All Feathers: Doing Diversity and Inclusion Right, and it's essentially a how-to guide, particularly written for small to medium-sized enterprise, just to say, here's all of the tricks. This just do this. And then in 2022, I released my second book, which is called Alphabet Soup. That's behind me. The Essential
Mhm.
Guide to LGBTQ2 plus inclusion at work. Very much a passion project. My third book came out this year, and it's sort of diversity adjacent. It's the biography of a drag queen,
Mhm.
called All About Evie Into the Oddity, which is the biography of Evie Oddly, who was the winner of season 11 of RuPaul's Drag Race. And now I'm focused on book number 4, which I never thought ever in my lifetime that I would have 3 best-selling books, let alone 4. So I'm focused on inclusive leadership. I thought long and hard about what topic I wanted to write that would have an impact.
Yes.
That piece was really important to me. Um, not interested in writing something for the sake of writing something. I'm interested in sort of seeing change, and I sort of stepped back over the past, I don't know, 6 months or so, maybe a year, and said, what's missing here?
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think we're lacking leadership.
Yeah.
I think about all of the organizations that recently, in the past few months, have said that they're stepping away from idea
Mhm.
that, we're talking about Ford and Best Buy and Lowe's that have said that they're, shutting down their diversity offices and they won't be sponsoring things. And my immediate thought in all of these cases is, well, this is where we lack leadership.
Yeah.
This is where, the CEOs and C-suite executives of these organizations followed the speaking points that were provided to them and said, oh, yes, diversity is the most important thing. It's critically important to us, blah, blah, blah. And when things got a little tough, they said,
Mhm.
oh, it's okay, we're out. No, don't worry about that. We're not going to do that. And what that says to me is that they didn't understand the business case. They didn't really truly understand the impact to their organization. And 2, they lack the leadership skills. They lack, those skills of what it means to be an inclusive leader and why that matters. And so I've started, it's not done, but I've started writing this book on inclusive leadership. And the objective is that it is not just a book that says, here's what inclusive leadership is. It's a book that says, here's how to be an inclusive leader. It's a workbook. There are practical
Mm.
exercises. There are case studies. Like this is a you know, uh, a book that will really is designed to help people actually change their behavior.
Yes.
And I am right. I do have a co-author who you may be familiar with, Sertrice Plea, the lovely and talented. I'm so lucky to have both of you in my life. And
She's
Sertrice
an
and I were
excellent
talking.
co-author, by the way. You got
She's
a good one
yeah.
in her.
I'm really, really fortunate. So it's the fun part for me is I wrote my first essentially 3 books on my own.
Yeah.
And I now have somebody that I can call up and go, what do you think of this? And she provides me her honest opinion. And she's often right. So far, so she's been right. And so that's a real treat for me as a writer, because as a writer, you work in like your little bubble. It's totally isolated. So I'm now getting to work with someone. So that's exciting. And we're very much of the same mindset of this needs to be something that will be impactful, that will change behavior.
Yeah.
I want to see, true leaders standing up and pushing back on this anti idea, anti DEI, racist, misogynist, homophobic rhetoric
Mm-hmm.
that is coming from a very small fringe minority.
It's
And
true.
it's the number is teeny tiny,
Teeny tiny.
and yet they're taking up all the oxygen in the room. And we need
Mm-hmm.
leaders who are going to stand up and say, yeah, no, we're good, thanks very much. I think about the leadership of Walt Disney and Walt Disney World in Florida that stood up and pushed back against the homophobic behavior of Ron DeSantis and his government. That's what we need. So
Yeah.
that's the goal. We have a model, and I'm not going to spill the tea here, but it's a 4-pillar model of behaviors that we believe that people need to develop more in order to be inclusive leaders.
So I won't make you spill the tea on your model, but I want to
Okay.
go back to what you said about how you're seeing there's 2 main areas where leaders are failing when it comes to inclusive leadership. First is
Yep.
not understanding the business case and how it impacts the organization. And the second was just not having the skills of an inclusive leader. And so you just gave one example of what one of those skills could be, which is pushing back and standing up and using one's platform to really take a stand for DEI. What are some other skills or behaviors that you've seen or want inclusive leaders to do?
Well, the first, and I will spill the tea on this, is you have to accept that inequity exists in the world.
Mm.
And, when we talk with leaders, they often see themselves as inclusive,
Yeah.
but then their behavior ends up being exclusive.
Yeah.
And a big part of that is because a lot of people don't fully grasp that equity is a key issue here. That
Yeah.
we don't, and for anybody listening, the root of this is that equity means we don't all start at the same place
Yes.
because of bias, because of privilege, because of aspects of our lives. And you have to accept that inequity exists. And you have to accept that in order to be an inclusive leader, you have to treat people how they need to be treated.
Yes.
If you can't accept that, you will never be an inclusive leader. If you come into the world and think, oh, well, if everyone just works hard, then they'll get ahead. You're done before you start. Because it's a myth. And if you
Yeah.
can't accept that that's a myth, then nothing else matters.
We're dead in the water.
Yeah.
Did you read Dolly Chugg's book, The Person You Mean to Be?
No, I haven't.
I strongly recommend it. It's all about allyship. I don't know why she didn't call it such. I'll have to ask her that someday. But she talks about this concept of being a good-ish person. And
Yeah.
I think people get caught up in this idea, well, I'm a good person. And so I believe in a world that is unjust because I'm a good person, right? So everyone else must be good people. So we must have a fair world. And as you said, that's a myth. That's not true. And so if we can adopt this mentality of, I'm a good-ish person, I want to be a good person, I want to work towards a better world, but inequity exists, discrimination exists, all the isms exist, right? And so I need to start from that awareness to be able to change my own behaviors or recognize, these bad behaviors in others, so I can stand up and take that stance. I also found a really cool example of equity in action last night. I went to the Billie Eilish concert here in Pittsburgh last night. It was amazing. And I had never thought about how predominantly female her fan base is. It wasn't surprising, but I just hadn't thought about it. I just thought about her in the context of me listening to her music, right? And my husband, who I took with me, was griping that they put signs over the majority of the men's bathrooms and turned them into women's bathrooms last night because 90% plus of the people there last night were women. And so we needed 90% of the bathrooms to be women's bathrooms. And so he's having this hard time. I'm like, but imagine what the lines would look like in these women's room. And each man could have his own bathroom to himself if they didn't make that switch. And that was equity in action,
Absolutely.
And I love that example because it's not inflammatory. It's not triggering. I think we can all agree there should have been more women's rooms at the Billie Eilish concert last night.
Arguably there should be more space for women's restrooms or women's bathrooms
in general
everywhere. Because if you've ever been to the theater, like, men, we get to stand up to pee, whether you like it or not. And yet there's always a line at the women's room. And I, as a proud feminist, am always saying to the women, ugh, just go in our bathroom. There's no one in there. Come on. It's fine. And women will take me up on it. I'm like, it's safe. It's totally good. Largely because the events I'm at, it's women and gay men. So
not as much risk in those types of environment. I'm one of those women that take people up on it. I don't care. I think all bathrooms should be gender neutral, but
I totally agree.
Who would have thought our conversation would have led here?
Kind of figured.
So accepting that inequity exists in the world, just that mere acceptance. And I mean, does someone just wake up one day and just recognize it? Do we have to have this come to Jesus moment? How do people get to that place of acceptance?
Yeah, I do think you have to see those moments in real life.
Yeah.
There has to be a moment because of course we are taught from childhood to be fair.
Yeah.
And that is ingrained in who we are. So it's a struggle to believe that fairness doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And so you have to see something to understand that it really exists. And I will raise the instance of George Floyd's brutal murder in 2020. He was not the first Black man to be killed by police.
No.
He was the first one that it was caught on film and shared all around the world.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, people who look like me, not as handsome, but we accept that, people who look like me couldn't ignore it anymore and thought, oh, wow, yeah, anti-Black racism is a thing, to the shock of zero Black people.
Yeah.
But it was unavoidable at that point. I'll give you another example It's a bit innocuous, but it's an important one. A friend of mine who uses public transit to get to work every day, and she told me once, she's like, "Oh yeah, people touch my hair all the time." She's a Black woman, and she has twisted braids.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Come on, girl, no one touches your braid. Who would do that, right? Like, it's such a violation of someone to go up and touch their hair." And then I watched it happen.
Mm.
And then I couldn't unsee it.
Yeah.
And it's moments like that that you need to see that inequity exists. So a great way to do that in your organization is to do a pay equity audit.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are the person who says, we pay everyone the same, do a pay equity audit. Prove me wrong.
Yeah.
I want to be wrong.
Yeah.
But statistically, women still make around 76 cents on the dollar, and that number goes dramatically drops for women of color, with Indigenous women at the bottom of the list, I think around 64 cents on the dollar. So if you don't believe that you are not paying people fairly and equitably, prove me wrong. Do a pay equity audit.
Yeah.
And when you see the numbers, and this happened to the CEO of Salesforce, former CEO, I thought he's stepped off now, but when he did a pay equity audit, it was his head of HR forced him to do it. And he basically told her to do it to get rid of her, because he was like, no, you're just going to find that everything's fine. And he looked at the results and went, holy crap.
Wow.
And they fixed everything. And a year later, they did another audit and they had more problems again. So if you need to have a moment like that where it's just undeniable anymore.
Yeah.
And once you've seen behind the curtain, you can't unsee it. And it turns people into advocates. But they need to have that moment, that, as you say, come to Jesus moment, but that triggering moment where they go, oh yeah, okay, this is actually happening.
Yeah, I can't remember what my moment was exactly. It might have been while working at Amazon and noticing there's just like there were no women on the C-suite. I think there was one woman. She was, surprise, surprise, the CHRO, which people love to say outside of the business, which I think is ridiculous, because if you don't have a CHRO, you don't have a business, because you need people.
Yeah.
But I remember this idea of seeing behind, you can't unsee it. Once you pull that curtain, you can't unsee it. And here in Pittsburgh, the population of Pittsburgh is 25% Black. And so whenever I go into any big space in Pittsburgh and I don't see about 1 in 4 people who are Black, I'm like, there's something wrong with this event, with this room that I'm in, because we're missing out on a key demographic of our population. And I can't unsee it, to the point where even if we're going to the museum, we're going to the movies, I point it out, and like, I can't unsee it to this point. And so also I wanted to go back to another point you shared about acknowledging the inequity exists. And I'm really big on micro affirmations. So those subtle behaviors that result in people feeling included, feeling like they belong. And I used to go straight to the micro affirmations and not even really talk about the microaggressions, because I just assumed people knew what microaggressions were. I just assumed like, well, everyone talks about microaggressions, I'm going to be unique and talk about micro affirmations. And my colleague at the time, she pointed out, by not acknowledging those microaggressions, then you give people a pass as though they don't exist.
Exactly.
Like, you are absolutely right. So I always, anytime I talk about microaffirmation now, I always have a preamble about microaggressions and how it's so important to recognize those and do what we can to mitigate them within ourselves and others. But Michael, I could talk to you all day about inclusive leadership and gender neutral bathrooms and microaggressions, but we are wrapping up on time. I had 3 takeaways that I pulled from your brilliance that you were sharing with us, but I want you to call me out if I got any of them wrong, or if we could have a different one. So first takeaway, inclusive leaders understand the business case and how it advances their organizational goals.
Correct.
Second takeaway, inclusive leaders stand up and push back against anti-DEI. They make that stand. They use their platform and privilege to push back. And third, accept that inequity exists in the world. Get to the point of your own development where you can't unsee it.
You did a great job.
Thank Thank you. You did a great job. I'm just so thrilled to bring you to my audience and let people know about your books. Now, where can people find you? Like, what's the best way to get in touch with you? How do people follow along in your journey, Michael?
You can go to my website at michaelbach.com, or you can find me on all of the social media platforms that I'm on. The Michael Bach is my handle.
And I'll tell you what, the Michael Bach has some very impressive socials. I feel like in the DEI space, we don't get much social presence. You are defying that. You are rocking the social world. So
You're
definitely
very
follow
kind.
Michael. He is phenomenal. And when is the book expected to drop? Do y'all have an expected date yet?
We don't have an exact date yet, but it's going to be early in 2026. So we
Okay.
have another year. I have to finish writing it, and Sir Teresa has to finish working and fixing my mess. So Sir Teresa and I have to finish putting this thing together, but early 26.
That's so exciting. Well, I can't wait to read it. And I'm super grateful for you coming on today. So thank you
It's
for
my
being here.
pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you for all that you do,